Week 12 of the fantasy football season, and his wide receivers start sits. First start Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So we know Joe Burrow's out for the season with the wrist injury. Jake Browning, the starting quarterback. And Ja'Marr Chase in last week's game, he didn't do anything pretty much. That touchdown in garbage time saved him. Only 2 catches, 12 yards and a touchdown last week versus Baltimore. So this week here, another tough matchup versus a solid Pittsburgh Steelers defense. But at least Jake Browning, he was taking shots in that game deep and just missed linking up with Chase. I think Chase, obviously, his fantasy value will take a hit with Joe Burrow out of the lineup. But if Browning could get the ball down the field and at least be a competent quarterback, I think Chase still puts up decent numbers. And even in the tougher matchup this week versus Pittsburgh, I'm still putting him in the starting lineup. Next start, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. And Michael Pittman, a nice bounce-back season this year. After last season, he really didn't do much with Matt Ryan at quarterback for this Indianapolis Colts team. At least Gardner Minshew, he's coming and filled in for Anthony Richardson. And we know Minshew's a gunslinger and a quarterback that tries to push the football down the field. And that obviously fits Michael Pittman's route running ability and is a deep ball threat. So this week here with a good matchup versus Tampa Bay, where we just saw Brandon Ayuk have a monster ball game versus Buck defense. Michael Pittman, once again, is a nice start. Next start, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. DJ Moore, it's been a solid season for him, especially with Justin Fields. And now Fields back in the lineup after missing 4 games. And Moore went for a solid 7-catch, 96-yard, and a touchdown in Fields' return at the Detroit line. So this week here, potential shootout at the Minnesota Vikings. Indoor game, which obviously is always a plus. And DJ Moore, we know he's one of the best yard-after-catch wide receivers and a guy who's got great speed. So this week here with a good matchup and Justin Fields back in the lineup, he's a start. Next start, Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers, 10 in receptions this season. I know he had some monster weeks early in the year, and the numbers have dropped off a little bit, but still weekly, I pencil him in 12, 15 fantasy points minimum in PPR leagues. And this week here, great matchup at the Tennessee Titans, which we know they're good against the run, but obviously you could throw the football all day, and wide receivers have had big games at this Tennessee defense. We saw last week Calvin Ridley, who really didn't do much all season, going over 100 yards and scoring 2 touchdowns. So Adam Thielen in a game where they're most likely going to be close or trailing is Carolina. I think he has a good game and a monster game possibly this week. Next start, Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. So Tank Dell, he's moving up that ranking board each and every week at the wide receiver position. And this week here, a good matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, where we know they do turn the football over a lot on opposing offenses. But Tank Dell, him and C.J. Stroud, what a combo it's been already in both these players' rookie season. Tank Dell could run all the routes. He could burn you deep and make plays. And pretty much weekly, he's finding the end zone and putting up at least 80 yards. So this week here, in another decent matchup versus the Jaguars coming to town, Tank Dell is a start. Next start, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. So Jalen Waddle, it's been a struggle for him over the last few weeks. And I know he's not 100% as well with that knee injury. We saw him suffer in that Germany game versus the Kansas City Chiefs. But Jalen Waddle, like I said, last few weeks, numbers haven't been there. This week, definitely a tougher matchup versus the New York Jets. I give up the least amount of fantasy points to receivers on the season, but we saw Khalil Shakir have a big game versus the Jets last week. And I think Waddle, he's just got to get back to the basics, and something's got to give with defenses rolling double or triple coverage towards Tyreek Hill's way. I think Jalen Waddle could get back on track this week, even in the tougher matchup in New York on Black Friday, and have a good game. In the final start, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. And now with a lot of injuries, Mark Andrews out for the season with his ankle and knee injury. Odell Beckham with a shoulder injury. We don't know if he's going to play in this game. And now Lamar Jackson, he's got to get the ball to other players in this offense. And Zay Flowers, I think, steps up. And this week here with a great matchup with the Chargers, that can't stop anyone in that secondary. I think Flowers has a good game, possibly one of the better games of the season with him, getting force-fed with more targets, and just a great matchup with the Los Angeles Chargers. So he's a start. For me, now to the sits, Hollywood Brown, the Arizona Cardinals. So Hollywood Brown, it's been an up-and-down season for him. But the last few weeks, the numbers really haven't been there with Kyler Murray back in the lineup. Pretty much it's been Trey McBride getting targeted for the most part by Kyler Murray. And just Murray obviously taking off and running a lot as well. And Rondale Moore has had a good rapport with Murray as well. So Hollywood Brown, the numbers have gone down. I know it's a decent matchup versus the Rams this week, but he's not really a wide receiver I could trust in crunch time already here in Week 12. Next hit, Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So pretty much his ceiling's 9-12 fantasy points for Chris Godwin. We know he's not really a deep threat in this offense. It's been Mike Evans, the number one receiver easily this year. And Godwin, he had a better rapport with Tom Brady than he does with Baker Mayfield. Mayfield likes targeting that deep ball to a Mike Evans. And then middle of the seams, for the most part, been Cade Otton over the last few weeks. So right now, while Godwin's only topping off 9-12 fantasy points, and I know he has a good matchup at the Indianapolis Colts, he's still a receiver that's tough to trust, in my opinion, this week. And he's a sit. DeAndre Hopkins, the next sit for me as well. He's pretty much been a touchdown-dependent wide receiver all season. I know he's got a pretty decent matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, but believe it or not, this Panther team held CeeDee Lamb down under 50 receiving yards, even though Lamb did have a touchdown in last week's game. So right now, DeAndre Hopkins, he's been a deep ball threat for Will Levis, and that's pretty much been it. If he's not getting that deep ball and scoring the touchdown, he's not putting up fantasy points. So this week here in a game where I think it's going to be a Derrick Henry game script where you could run all day on this Panther defense, I don't see Hopkins doing much, and he's a sit. Next sit, Gabe Davis of the Buffalo Bills. So Gabe Davis coming off a goose egg, and he's obviously the definition of a boom or bust wide receiver. Either he's going to score 20 fantasy points or he's going to score 5-6 fantasy points. So this week here, Philadelphia, where I know they got a leaky secondary, they give up a lot of big plays, no doubt about it, is this Eagle team as well. Just Gabe Davis, I can't trust. Khalil Shakir's looked better than him over the last few weeks. Stephon Diggs, obviously the number one man over there. And Dalton Kincaid already working his way up as a top 5, top 8 tight end. So right now with Davis, a little bit schemed out of the offense, it seems like, over the last few weeks. He's a sit and a tough receiver to trust. Next sit's George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this season, very tough in the passing game. It's been for Pittsburgh Steelers to have any consistency or get the football to their playmakers, Deontay Johnson and Pickens. So the last few weeks here, he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points, is George Pickens. This week here, middle-of-the-pack type of matchup with Cincinnati. And we know Cincinnati now is going to have to rely on their defense more than they have with Joe Burrow out for the season. So right now with a tougher matchup, Kenny Pickett, one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, and he get it to a playmaker like George Pickens. Obviously, that's been a problem all season. And he's a sit. Next sit, Jerry Jeudy of the Denver Broncos. So Jerry Jeudy, he's had a couple decent games here and there, but for the most part, he really hasn't done much. And Courtland Sutton, easily the number one wide receiver on this Denver Bronco team, especially the last few weeks. Sutton's had 2 touchdowns in a game each, and last week a game-winning touchdown towards the end of that one versus the Minnesota Vikings. So right now with a tough matchup, and him and Russell Wilson not really on the same page, but Wilson for the most part targeting McLaughlin and Pirine out of the backfield, and Sutton with Jeudy getting 4 or 5 targets per game and only 7-10 fantasy points per game. So this week here with a tough matchup, and pretty much this offense built around Sutton and dump-off passes to the running backs. Judy's not really a wide receiver to trust this week. And the final sits Tyler Boyd of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Tyler Boyd, he was on a good run, but now with Joe Burrow out of the lineup, obviously, most of these players are going to take a hit on the Cincinnati offense. Him and T. Higgins, I think, take the biggest hit. Jamar Chase, still one of the best route runners in the game, and a guy could burn any secondary. So I think Chase, for the most part, his numbers will be all right this season, but Tyler Boyd, we saw it last week, not much targets, and T. Higgins getting back into the lineup as well, it looks like this week here in a crucial game now versus Pittsburgh. Tyler Boyd, I don't expect much out of him. He's a sit, so that's wide receiver start sits for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.